So what I am going to speak about today is my experience of the last 7 days, trying to solve a blue screen of death issue that was being a bit tricky. While I do that, I am going to be testing Vox CPM2, which is a potential replacement for Vibe Voice. So yes, this is me, but it is a Vox CPM2 version of me. I'll do a video at a later time on that. While I'm talking and have nothing to show you, I will be subjecting you to the wonder of my journey through AI video creation. Starting with Carly, which I made back in January 2025, and have been toiling on this very machine ever since, day and night, which might also explain the BSOD and other issues I ran into, but more on that as we get started. Back in September of 2025, I made the video title, Memory Tricks in ComfyUI for Low VRAM, and at the time it sorted out ComfyUI for my machine. What I discovered recently is that some aspects of that now hinder the machine, and so this video will also be an update on that. Here are the salient changes that I am making as of this moment. The rest of this video will deep dive into how and why I came to these conclusions as of the 21st of June 2026. Firstly, I will not be trying to mix RAM sticks in my machine again for using with ComfyUI. It worked until it didn't. That was the first major cause of the BSOD for me when using ComfyUI, but not the only one. Secondly, I already decided to underclock my GPU last year because I live in a hot climate. I wanted my 3060 GPU to last as long as it could. Doing so gave me no noticeable slowdown in ComfyUI. In future, I will be doing the same with RAM sticks, and here is why. While trying to solve the BSOD issue, I consulted LLMs. I had thought at first it was SSD failure, but needed to isolate the issue before wasting money on hardware. To confirm it wasn't RAM failure, I disabled XMP in the BIOS and reduced my RAM sticks from 3600 MHz to standard 2133 MHz. I noticed absolutely no change in speed in ComfyUI for doing this. It did reduce the number of BSOD, but it didn't get rid of them. But this told me one important thing. What it told me is that I don't need overclocked RAM sticks and I don't need an overclocked GPU card. I firmly believe companies overclock these to sell them to us as faster machines and to blow them up quicker, because then we replace them sooner. Gamers may benefit from overclocking, but ComfyUI users probably don't. As such, in future, I will disable XMP in BIOS and underclock both RAM and GPU. So this reduced my BSOD, but didn't get rid of it. However, repeating the BSOD on command was now more challenging. The crash error was always memory management, but no clues existed in the memory dump file or in Windows Event Viewer leading up to each crash. I kept pencil notes of everything and was feeding that to the LLM as a ChatGPT project, hoping it would reveal more clues. ChatGPT was convinced it was not an SSD failure and remained focused on RAM as the issue, but I wasn't convinced. So my third interesting discovery was that I no longer need massive swap files to help cope with only having 32 gig of RAM. This must be due to all the changes ComfyUI devs have made in the last 8 months since I made the video in September 2025 on memory management. But to take advantage of what is likely the ComfyUI's dynamic RAM management features, we need to avoid putting in switches that then kneecap the value it can give us. I tried putting the full range of switches into the startup batch file, but I still got BSOD at much the same rate. So LLM next suggested I disable all my swap files, and I agreed. As I logged the memory levels during BSOD crashes, it was becoming apparent that it wasn't just happening when the GPU or RAM was being hammered. This image shows several things I will talk about in a moment, but if you can make it out there, my second monitor was snapshotting the moment a BSOD happened, a cunning way to catch the memory situation since Windows Event Viewer and crash dumps did not. What you see in this image is low RAM and VRAM use. At this moment, I had just started searching Google for additional errors being caused by FP8 models, but not GUFs. Another compounding issue that I wasn't sure related to my problem. I still thought failing SSD was the cause, LLM still thought RAM, but now warned me it could be worse. It might be motherboard and CPU management of memory. I had PTSD by this point waiting for the next crash, but still no idea how much this was going to cost to fix. All my hardware was over a year old, having been hammered relentlessly day and night. This is when I removed all the swap files. I had been working for a long time with system managed swap file on the C drive, 32 GB static swap file on M drive, and a 32 GB static swap file on the S drive, all fast SSD drives. The reasons for this I discussed in the September 2025 Memory video already mentioned, I now disabled them all and left only a single system managed swap file on S drive. I was avoiding C because it was the SSD I believed to be failing. More on that later. What shocked me after rebooting was that ComfyUI now ran quicker than it had been, and weirder still, it wasn't doing OOMs or falling over on heavy RAM and VRAM tasks like it used to in September 2025. If I didn't have big static swap files in place, I had to stop and consider why. But wonderful as it was, I was still getting 2 or 3 BSOD a day, and in exactly the same way. So what to look at next? At this point, I had to make a confession. I had not been totally honest in my desire to maximize RAM. I had for some weeks been running with mixed RAM in. I actually had 48 gigabytes of RAM in mixed sticks. ChatGPT laughed in its sentient way and told me politely that I was a massive knob and to take them out. I'd kidded myself that it couldn't be that causing it because they'd been working fine for so long. This then solved the main issue. And so far it has been running a couple of days with no BSOD. My setup is no switches in the ComfyUI batch file, only a single system managed swap file on the S drive, and just 32 gigabytes of RAM sticks that are not mixed. I have had no BSOD so far since then. It's still in testing, but the important point is it reveals the changes to the situation since September 2025 to June 2026, and also the value of underclocking RAM and VRAM, which given their price right now, I'll take the extra lifetime. It also highlights how willing I am to delude myself based on what I want and not the facts. A lesson for us all in there, maybe. Finally, I want to talk about the software I used to isolate the problem and try to rule things out. It was challenging because of compounding issues. I still have to test more FP8 files, but I have been using Client FP8 and it seems the issue has stopped there too. So let's discuss software for Windows and how I use it. Here on the left is Process Explorer 64, a free download from Microsoft, which is better than Task Manager for monitoring RAM and VRAM and swap file activity, all of which you should be watching while running ComfyUI. Where the red arrow is currently pointing is important. The limit is the total of RAM and swap files. Current is the current use of both. Peak being the highest it's hit. I haven't yet broken the limit, and I expect that is because ComfyUI is managing RAM efficiently without the switches in. I'll push it harder once I am convinced the BSOD issue is fixed. I generally watch the top bar for the memory, CPU and input-output activity, and then click on GPU tab where the red arrow is located to monitor VRAM use. Here you see the top line in red is what I call GPU black, and I try to keep that down at nothing. The orange middle area is VRAM use. I have 12 gigabytes VRAM and I like to see it using 10 or 11 gigabytes of that if the ComfyUI model can. What I started using during the BSOD issue was MSI Afterburner, as it gave me more info. It also offers logging, and I used it last year to confirm a memory leak with an NVIDIA driver was causing BSOD back then on overnight batch runs. This can drill down into everything and is beyond the scope to discuss today, but I used it for watching RAM, GPU usage and power usage and CPU temperatures, hoping to catch the various weasels that were running amok through my system, or at least rule things out. For testing RAM sticks, I was advised to use testmem 5 and run it inside Windows, not outside of it, in order to more likely catch issues. I was also told it would need a lot of testing to be certain. I spent a few hours running it, and it's why I thought my mixed RAM sticks were not the problem. Turns out I was wrong. They were a big part of the problem, as discussed, but not the only one. Swap files on different speed drives was where it began escalating. And once I ran all tests, took all info to ChatGPT and discussed possible causes, we started looking at CPU and power as potential factors, if only to rule them out. One thing ChatGPT highlighted was age and wear on overclock machines, even talking about the glue on the CPU at one point. And in the end, I believe the overclocking compounded the memory failures. This all would have led to me buying new hardware as a solution. Instead, I bought more time, and I am pretty happy with that. The other thing I used for hardware testing was OCCT, which you see here. I used it just for the VRAM test, and again ran it for a couple of hours and twice. It also showed no errors, but further research suggested my card, the 3060 NVIDIA, and maybe some others have something that fixes errors as they happen and makes it harder for them to show up on OCCT or tests like it. And last but not least is Crystal Disk Info, which I think many of us have in ComfyUI on the manager bar. I don't now because I prefer to run ComfyUI as streamlined as possible. I'll discuss my ComfyUI setup in a moment. But let's quickly talk about the red herring in the mix that had me disbelieving ChatGPT, because I'm a human, goddammit, and I refuse to be bested by a goddamn machine. So I went into this problem knowing that I was already looking at a C drive that was showing 81% health, while all my other drives were 98% or 100%. Back in September 2025, we were warned, woe unto those who use static swaps on SSD to compensate for RAM. So naturally, when BSOD started hitting, I thought it was end of days for my SSD-C drive. I also preferred SSD failure to RAM failure because the solution would be about 10 times cheaper. And though 81% isn't great, there are no critical error failures shown in Crystal Disk Info. And ChatGPT from the start said, it isn't your SSD. But let's face it, in ComfyUI world, LLMs spend more than 81% of their time being confidently wrong about stuff. But this is hardware failure. They have much more internet info to go on, while ComfyUI is bleeding edge on the front of the wave and mostly bullshit from Redditor experts like myself. Ha 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 ha, laughs maniacally. I'm at 10 minutes and boring myself rigid with voxcpm 2TTS at this point, probably you too. So let's wrap it there. I'll do a video on my ComfyUI setup another day. I hope this has given some insights into approaches for figuring out BSOD errors and memory issues, especially if it saves on unnecessary hardware purchases. Thanks for listening, and as always, follow me on Patreon for more.